instrumental in helping us to move through the city council and getting a street named after my dad, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on into the program. So once they come, we will allow him to speak, although he is definitely on the program. But I want to move along, and there is, in Eddie's words, the non-traditional approach. It's excerpts from my dad's work on the non-traditional approach to criminal and social justice. So.
I got out yesterday. And I wanted to come here tonight to pay my respects to all of you, because without you I wouldn't be here tonight. For a long time I, perhaps erroneously, not perhaps, but definitely erroneously, used to make a false separation between what we call classic political prisoners and men who are in prison for what we would not consider to be classical political so-called crimes. And not too long ago I had a very long talk with Brother Herman Ferguson, and he expressed some ideas to me that I thought were incredible in terms of the impact that they had on my own life and my own outlook on the prison system. And what he said essentially boiled down to enough was that at the time that the Europeans invaded Africa, they declared war on all black people. And we've been waging that war ever since. And he said that all the men who were in those prisons may not be classical political prisoners, but they're certainly prisoners of war.
So I know that audio wasn't that clear, but inside of your program,
I point out
there is an excerpt. Oh, okay.
Analysis and writing and research that was done on the non-traditional approach to criminal and social justice was performed by Cardell Sherrod, who we affectionately call Blood, Hassan Gale, Lawrence Hayes, Larry White, and myself. So oftentimes you will read or hear that Eddie Ellis presented the non-traditional approach, but that approach was essentially a collective effort. In the prisons, we began to look around in the early 70s, and what we saw was that the majority of prisoners were black and Latino and poor white people. Very few Asians at that time, very few Indians. And we began to ask some questions about why it was that a system which purported to serve the entire state seemed to be so focused and concentrated on people of color and people who did not have financial means. Seems as though every place we went, we ran into prisoners who were friends of ours, prisoners and people who came from various neighborhoods in New York City that we were who we knew very well. And out of that empirical observation, we began to try to see if we could document some sense of just what was taking place. And we investigated Census Bureau reports, we investigated Department of Labor statistics, Department of Education statistics, Department of Correctional Services statistics, and out of those statistics and out of that analysis came what we call the non-traditional approach to criminal and social justice, and I'll explain the We started out by asking a fundamental question, and that question is, how is it and why is it that although Latinos and blacks in New York State comprise approximately 28% of the state population, and at that time we were approximately 21, 22% of the population. Why is it that although we only comprise 28% of the population, at the same time we account for 85% of all the people in the state prison system? Why is that? How could that be? And as we began to research this question, we came across some other startling facts. And one of them was the fact that 75% of the entire state prison population came from 7 neighborhoods in New York City.
Peace.
And those 7 neighborhoods.
Peace. Peace and resurrection. Uncle Ma'at. Power to the people. Power to the ancestors. Free the land. Free them all. Shit alive. Bring it in, community. Thank y'all for being here. Welcome. Today is the third and last webinar of this series. Shout out to that, right? As we launch the Kabaka Alice Luqmon Institute, right? So please get connected, Kabaka, KAL-institute.org to get more information on all the webinars that we've been sharing with the community, the information we've been sharing with the community, the trainings that we have coming up, and the engagements that we have coming up. Today's webinar is about genetic memory. Genetic memory, right? It's about genetic memory, right? And we have a long legacy of Black liberation, right? We have a long legacy of Black liberation that the Kabaka Alice Luqmon Institute stands on and is sharing with community to be a positive virus, in our communities, and specifically to those mainstream institutions that are supposed to serve our communities, right? And so today we will be going deeper into the genetic memory, the theory, and the practice that the Kabaka Alice Luqmon stands on. And with that, I pass to my comrade Corey to take us through libation.
Ashe, free the land. We already had a little libation. Shout out to Greer, Center for New Leadership, all of our family members, H.O.L.L.A YLC, and our elders, and particularly Eddie Ellis for starting us off. We're going to do a verbal libation. This is a libation to our spirits. This is a poem called, Resurrection. It's time to resurrect. So let's go. I said we came to heal. Y'all know what we asking. Don't act like the trauma don't keep us relapsing. I said you could heal without their permission. I said we could heal without their permission. The non-traditional approach will not be colonized, cannot be colonized. It's Afrocentric. It wasn't just Nas, but Kemet, Luqmon, Dr. Green, many of our ancestors said it was written. And H.O.L.L.A is just following tradition. That's why we stay in community specific. But don't get caught slipping. Philanthropy be pimping. That's why our grassroots leadership be shifting. And the cure violence and restorative justice models are wicked. First, they stole our community-specific activism. Now they done teamed up with capitalism. We see right through that fake wisdom, straight into its racism. White supremacy be lying. Our ancestors are crying. Our elders are dying. And we still haven't won yet. And it's like a sad contest because so many of us are joining the nonprofit industrial complex while our Black liberation tradition is fading into the sunset. Nah, we ain't done yet. How we gonna trade in our community-specific roots? That's the concrete we rose from. Fuck these grants, LOIs, FRPs. These fuckers owe one. Question, how they gonna fund indigenous people on the land that they stole from? And I don't know why we even work with or try to build with they racist ass. When all of our leaders, they either kill, jail, and they ideas, they try to take them fast. It's a serious time, and an uncooked mind is really deadly. So we grounding our spirits from study group to study group. It ain't about the grind, it's staying ready. It ain't about who dance better in these nonprofit rooms to attain the riches. Who done switched it? When has freedom ever been about the digits? If you listen closely, you can hear the elders and spirits talking. And fear is just a reminder to move with caution. And they said we would lose centuries ago, but we've been winning. And y'all Christians say being African sinner means we sinning? Nah, we just trying to be interdependent. In the process of self-determination and resurrection, every day is a new beginning. I said we came to help without their permission. The non-traditional approach will not be colonized, cannot be colonized. It's Afrocentric. It wasn't just Nas, but Kemet, Luqmon, Dr. Green. Many of our ancestors said it was written. And H.O.L.L.A is just following tradition. That's why we stay in community specific. Holla. Ashe, ashe,
Ashe, right on, right on. Ashe.
ashe. We gonna keep it flowing, man. We got the ancestors popping. Shout out to our big brother Isaac Quarterly on the productions, the design, for holding us down. We've been journeying for the longest. They on the back screen. They've been holding down the web series, but they also are formerly incarcerated, you know, organizing themselves, a pastor, doing work in Harlem and East Harlem, serving young people, serving the people through ministry, and putting that non-traditional in it. So if you're looking for ways to connect with the community in East Harlem, if you're looking for supports with artistic production on all levels, hit up our brother. H.O.L.L.A, we are launching our third cohort of the African Rites of Passage. It's coming, it's coming. It's coming next year. We got the registration popping right now. So this is a call to family members and to local community members. If you got young people that you are trying to put into the Black liberation tradition, sign them up. For young people, queer, formerly incarcerated, undocumented, from the 7 neighborhoods, street affiliated, young people in college, between 10, 25, 10, 28, sign up. We're looking to build an intergenerational, intersectional space of young people of our Blackness, to continue building the work of our elders, and build that process to pass that struggle on to our young people. So look out for that. Look out for that. And it's a lot of processes to sign up. So we want people to sign up and we'll follow up with you. We are, talking about the KAL-INSTITUTE. The KAL-INSTITUTE is now public. Check out the website, KAL, KAL-institute.org. We developed this institution to outside of the nonprofit industrial complex as an interdependent African-centered institution, to continue the work that we did in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and we had some stumbles. We need a lot more African-centered institutions that are sustained by the interdependence of Black people to build African sovereignty. So we on that mission right there. So support that. Support that. That's for our family. That's for our elders. That's for you. That's for our communities. And we using the wisdom that we built in H.O.L.L.A and the resources that we built in H.O.L.L.A, which is a nonprofit, to develop something for ourselves that's bigger than a nonprofit. The People's Senate and H.O.L.L.A. Shout out to the People's Senate. Shout out to the Spirit of Mandela. Once again, we talking about our elders. We talking about our ancestors. We're going to be hosting a web series November 27th, November 23rd, November 23rd. And we're going to be talking about H.O.L.L.A's recent article, a case study on restorative justice, co-optation of the non-traditional approach. You don't want to miss that. Because we're going to be talking about what's so restorative justice about white supremacy, program pacification, and counterinsurgency. So it's November 23rd at 7 p.m. We want you to register in advance. And shout out to Brittany, shout out to Tag, shout out to the whole People Senate for seeing the article, wanting to engage in this kind of conversation. And we want to talk about how ideas is part of the warfare. How these people colonize our minds is part of the warfare, how they steal our revolutionary tactics and turn it against us, right? And how we got to be aware of that as well. We are encouraging folks to read the article before the discussion. Don't come not study. Read the article. It's on our website, hillwithholla.com. Read the article. Study the article, come with questions, come with thoughts. But most importantly, let's be on point about what restorative justice is. Let's understand the history of it, the development of it, and how it's not from the community-specific legacy. We're going to get into that. A couple of more things. I want to talk about Harlem Peace Walk for Justice and Liberation. On November 27th, they having organized a trip to Plymouth, Massachusetts to celebrate and commemorate and honor National Day of Mourning. You could find out more about that information by calling SB at 212-927-9065 or calling Jack at 917-703-7303. It's picking up November 27th. That's a Thursday at 6 a.m. at Yankee Stadium on the corner of 161st Street and River. Shout out to the Bronx. Shout out to the 7 neighborhoods. Shout out to Queens, Harlem, Brooklyn, Staten Island. We are asking for donations to reserve your seat between $30 and $60. You could send that to, once again, 917-703-7303, or you could email huitaca.saxa.ni@tuta.io. Once again, shout out to Harlem Peace Walk, doing very important work, connecting local struggles to international struggles, building local work in Harlem, and connecting with other movements across the city. They are also working with H.O.L.L.A and the Kabaka, Alice and Luqmon Institute to do a Kwanzaa event on December 30th, working with also Isaac Quarterly and in the AME Church. So come through to the AME Church. You get to see all of us, Isaac Quarterly, H.O.L.L.A, Harlem Peace Walk, and our peoples. And we're going to be celebrating the Nguzu Saba and fueling up our spirit so that we can make culture our reality and that we can fuel ourselves on for the next 365 days to live out our culture. And it's going to be a political education session process. We're not just having a Kwanzaa festival. We're having a Kwanzaa political education process, and we're trying to leave with a spirit of intergenerational movement building. We're going to have some presentations from an intergenerational group talking about each one, teach one. So you're getting lessons, you're getting stories from elders and young people, and we all leaving with responsibilities to continue our culture for 365 days. Besides that, we also have a couple of more Kwanzaa events. The Circles of Brothers are having a Kwanzaa event December 27th. December 27th, the Circles of Brothers. And we also are having another Kwanzaa conversation December 26th at Grace Church. We'll send out more information on those later. Hit us up. With that, I'll pass it to Jasiri. Resurrect.
Yes, thank you. And to move us on to the meat and potatoes of our conversation, we want to ground this conversation in genetic memory, right? Standing on genetic memory. As we said, our theory stands on a long legacy of Black liberation for the sustainability, fullness to Black liberation, for the transformation of self, community, race, and the nation, to fill in the gaps in mainstream institutions, as well as combat capitalist white supremacy science ideologies, and support the development of African Black interdependent institutions. And so we want to we're going to present our theories of resurrection and share with you your genetic memory, right? For you to study, for you to continue, right? For the sustainability of Black liberation. And that's what the work that the Kabaka Alice Luqmon Institute is geared towards doing. Sure.
Share the live, share the live. We on YouTube, H.O.L.L.A TV. Share the live, Peace Resurrect. We tapping in early on a Thursday. I'm also calling in from the West Coast, from California. So shout out to the West Side of Turtle Island and to all indigenous people and street formations and community members on this side of the direction.
Sure. And so the Kabaka Alice Luqmon Institute, right, which is obviously transforming and building on top of the mound outside of H.O.L.L.A, right, stands on the 4 theories of resurrection: African sacred science, the war, the African Ma'afa, the non-traditional approach to criminal social justice, and lastly, healing justice. And not within a specific order per se, but all those concepts is how we see ourselves, how we view the world, and how we organize in the world, and how we, the conversations that we have, right? The programs that we create, the type of community, the relationships that we are building, right? Is all in those 4 concepts. And those 4 concepts came from our legacy, did not come from us, right? We continue those concepts because we understand that those speak to our experiences and our worldview. So the first, we want to, giving y'all some of that paraphernalia, some of that ethnography, right, of what that looks like, right, when you do the 4 concepts, when you and it's the struggle, right, the protracted struggle. And so this is somewhat of that, right, diving into deep African culture, right, ancient African culture, right, diving into the stories within our communities, right, from the Black Liberation Movement, the long legacy of the Black Liberation Movement, and going to those places where our ancestors were, right, to be in that spirit, and to continue the work of community organizing, right, actively doing that. Ashe. Ashe. This is giving offering. And so first we want to start off with African sacred science. African sacred science is African indigenous eyes to the origins and development of humanity and civilization. Diop, 1956. It represents Black people's long history, all 3 million years of genetic memory, of Pan-African knowledges, systems of nature, civilization, development, cosmology, and ancestors' traditions that centers this knowledge for community-specific practice that are integral to Black people's fight and healing from her historical trauma, the African Ma'afa. African sacred science stands on the shoulders and masters, teachers such as Sobufa Some, Dr. Asa Hillard, Zora Neale Nelson, Dr. Ben Jokan, Dr. James Turner, Ella Baker, Queen Mother Moore, Dr. Matula Shakur, Sheikh Anta Diop, Dr. Francis Cress Wilson, African sacred science stands on the cultural and empirical works of Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, groundbreaking African-centered scholarship, and the production of the African origins of civilization, right? Because our history has been undeveloped, right? That's what Rodney Walter talks about, that our Baba ancestor, right? How our history has been undeveloped, right? Chancellor Williams also talks about that. And because of that, we have to actively, proactively dive into who we are and uncover, rediscover, and decolonize ourselves in that process. African sacred science supports the goals of the Kabaka Alice Luqmon Institute, right? As we said, the sustainability and forwardness for African sovereignty, pulling from a practice of Black liberation, science, ancestral teachings, community-specific lineages, and genetic memory simultaneously. Our African indigenous worldview of the origin of humanity and civilization is very important that we focus on, because we don't always focus on our worldview, our experiences. In 1962, Drusilla Dungy Houston, a self-taught African historian, who wrote the book, The Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire, stated that the world is a lie. Our analysis of this specific statement is that the history of the world has been fed to us inaccurately. Therefore, our place in it is not accurate. Right? We even have Baba ancestor, Dr. John Henry Clark, who stated that the missing pages of world history is Black history. Right? And that these inaccuracies, which foster in us a negative understanding and connection to our past, a confusion, right? Counterinsurgency, a confusion of what our present is, and uncertainty about our future. Uncertainty about our future. And so the Kabaka Alice Luqmon Institute challenges and critiques capitalist white supremacy science, right? We are in resistance because they're trying to erase our existence. That is very important. We are in resistance because they're trying to erase our existence. And that's why we go to African sacred science, right? A term that was coined and studied by Baba James Smalls, right? Like I said, we did not create these terms, but this came from our legacy. We follow the legacy, the coding of our legacy. Because we have been tricked, trained, and paid to believe and promote lies. Right? And so our genetic memory, as I said, the Kabaka Alice Luqmon Institute stands on the Black liberation science, ancestral teachings, community-specific lineages to fight and heal from historical trauma, the African Ma'afa. Ashe. And I'm going to pass to my brother to take us through.
Ashe, ashe. So we started off with that African sacred science and why that's important for our communities to be tapping into, our families to be tapping into, and why we need institutions that understand our culture from a sacred, scientific importance. And Jasiri already started talking about how part of the reason why we lost our science is because the war, or because the African Mayafa, which Mama Marima Ani gave us back in the days, which is a Kiswahili word, which really helped African people talk about the disaster that happened to our peoples, the destruction of our Ma culture, our African matriarchal culture. And that connects to our analysis of the war that we in. And we want to start off with a quote from one of our brothers, Dr. Ori Simon Burton, in his new book, Tip of the Spear, the Long Attica Revolt. Dr. Burton said, the prisons are a microcosm of empire. What this text provides is an archive and a theory-driven narrative exposing a war that has been intentionally concealed. So a lot of us, like Baba Sekou, talk about the war. Shout out to our ancestors, Baba Sekou Odinga, veteran of the Black Panther Party, Black Liberation Army. He talked about a lot of us don't even know we in war. Right? So that's another reason why this kind of analysis is very important for our work, because we need programs and we need institutions and we need families that clearly break down what's our reality and who's our enemy and what's the war that we in. So that it's not abstract and it's not out of our view. So Ori book is helping us really make clear and get a language and get analysis, particularly thinking about how our people have been fighting and struggling against this war. Right. So he continues, it shows that without understanding carceral spaces as a zone of undeclared domestic war, zones that are intrinsically linked to imperial and officially acknowledged wars abroad. So now he's making the connections that prisons are war. Prisons are domestic warfare and they're connected to international warfare. This is what we talk about, the American empire, this imperialist colonial state, right? And how its tentacles of war spread beyond the borders of Turtle Island. So we cannot fully understand how and why the United States become a global leader of incarceration that is today. So Tip of the Spear argues that prisons are war. Let's keep it moving to the next slide. So we just want to add some analysis to that, man, you know, from our legacy, our elders, pulling on their words, pulling on their wisdom, and we want to pass this struggle on and develop this science to the next level, right? This is still stuff that we got to build on the mound. So from our community-specific Black liberation science, our African worldview, it provides a clear destruction to our origin stories. That's part of the war. And the long aftermath of Black people's human development. social development, family development. It explains how Europeans, Indo-Europeans, and anti-Black people could create genocide and slow down and derail, create genocide against the people and derail our goals towards African sovereignty and Black liberation. It talks about the killing of our ancestors, our culture, our land, right? Our sacred sciences, removing us from those things. The African Maya for the war provides an explanation of how Black people are being attacked globally through capitalism, through imperialism, through international politics, right? Through domestic and foreign policies and laws, through social institutions and nonprofit institutions that sometimes act like they serve in the community while attacking the community. And these things all work in collaboration with each other as a continuation of enslavement and colonization. And part of that war is also the clamps of psychological warfare, right? The clamps on our minds, the clamps on our hearts, the clamps on our African spirit, our Black spirit. Let's keep going. So it's important for us to understand that the war at least have 4 levels: the historical, her historical / spiritual violence. So thinking about the historical or the historical and how that's a spiritual violence, right? Because you're taking us away from our culture, from our land, from our cosmology. And then thinking about how that's maintained by structural violence, institutional violence, right? And shout out to the Combi River Collector. And think about how it's internalized in our interpersonal relationships. Shout out to many of our people in transformative justice work that talks about interpersonal violence. Shout out to the Black Liberation Movement, the Black Power Movement, who had critical critique circles, right? And worked through trauma when the COINTELPRO pushed us there, and how they had to work through interpersonal stuff to continue keeping the struggle, right? So we talk about how the war pushes into our interpersonal levels, and then internalized violence, where we don't like ourselves, where we don't organize for ourselves, where we lose our agency, where we hate being Black, where we take on white people and other people's ideas instead of our own ideas, where we internalize the ideas of other people about our culture. Internalized violence, and shout out to the Resurrection Study Group, the work that they did in prison to kind of really make that work important for healing young men in prison who was going through internalized violence. All that to say is that Mama Bibi Baba Jalil, Mama Betty Smith, Betty Davis. Shout out to Betty Smith, that's my family. Mama Dayquee, a lot of our families stay talking about the war. Stay talking about in multiple ways how it slows us down from organizing, how it disorganizes us, how we are doing tactics without no goal at the end, right? It also talks about how the state is able to bring people into our movement and give us fake education that is not based on our legacy. So the war has many tentacles to it. And it helps us think about how we got to fight, how we got to build institutions that got the ground in the fight, right? How do we learn about the wars that we've been through so that we don't repeat the same mistakes in the fights that's to come? How do we describe and understand who's our enemy and why they are enemy, and how they became our enemy and why they're enemy to Black liberation and African sovereignty, and what's the lessons behind why they are enemies? These are the kind of programs and analysis that we pull from our elders, that we pull from our ancestors, that we pull from our legacies, that need to be in our families and our communities today, because this is part of what helps us heal internally, and also what continues to help us fight and heal externally as we build for survival and decolonization as we move in towards African sovereignty. And I'll pass it to Jasiri with that. Is there any more on that? Nope, nope. That's it. Oh, I do want to read a quote from Eddie. Let me close with a quote from Eddie. I do want to read a quote from Eddie before I pass. And shout out to some, Queen and Zinga. Shout out to Mama Betty. Shout out to Baba Sekou, Mama Marima Ani. Shout out to the Black Seminoles in Florida, Fort Muse. Shout out to the Black Seminoles in New Orleans, the 1811 Rebellion. Shout out to Carter G. Woodson talking about the miseducation of the Negro. Queen Mother Moore talking about us. We got to give reparations, free the land, re-Africanizing ourselves. Shout out to the 1712 Rebellion on Wall Street in New York, the indigenous African people standing up for freedom in New York. And these are people who taught us about the war. As I pass it to Jasiri to talk about the non-traditional approach, I want to read Eddie Ellis, because Eddie Ellis started off this program talking about the war as well. But we also want to talk about psychological warfare that Dr. Amos Wilson also talked about a lot. And Eddie said that the major problem with restorative justice model is that it assumes that there's two classes of people, one class of victims and one class of offenders, and somehow there needs to be a rekindling process between those two classes. I have a problem with that model because the people we traditionally call offenders are in fact victims. This is what Eddie is saying. So what we really have here is not a victim and an offender model, but we have two victims who have been brought in conflict with each other because of crime generative factors and because of social economic conditions, right? He's talking about the war. He's talking about the African Mayafa. So if you got an analysis about healing and you don't got the analysis of the African Mayafa, the war, we disagree with that. We said this in the 70s. We said this in the 90s. We saying it again. My understanding is based upon the work and research we did in prison some years ago. I worked very closely with many people in the Quakers movement who were instrumental in the development of restorative justice ideas. This is in the early 70s. And that was about the same time that the non-traditional approach was being developed by the Greenhaven think tank. So Eddie said we had a lot of workshops and seminars together with the Quakers, and we tried to merge the two ideas. Ultimately, we was never able to rekindle the question of victim and offender situation. So Eddie said it couldn't work out. In closing, Eddie gave this feedback to them when he closed out. He said the restorative justice model has not yet developed and is thinking to the point where it can replace the old model of the criminal justice. He said it's not a model for the community. It's not an alternative. It's the same model as the criminal justice system, right? It doesn't replace it. He said it needs to evolve. It needs to go through an evolving process. And he gave him feedback. He said it should be informed by the non-traditional approach, particularly the parts that break down a direct relationship between the community and these institutions. And the entire prison system, right? Talking about the war, like already said, prisons are domestic warfare. So this is another reason why restorative justice, which has been pushed into our neighborhoods over the last 10, 15, 20 years, and definitely the last 5 or 6 years, have really not addressed the issues in our communities of the violence in our families, in our relationship to the state. And we really need to abolish restorative justice for the Black neighborhood and heal ourselves from that counterinsurgency and get back to legacies and programs that really address the war. Ashe.
Ashe.
Shout out to my son, Mississippi. Shout out to Southampton, Virginia, the Nat Turner War Trail, talking about the war. Shout out to Bedford Hills, to Tonica, the Bedford Hills sisters, the Greenhaven think tank. The war is definitely prisons, and our people are in there. Shout out to all our people behind the bars.
Yes. Free them all. Free them all. And now that was great that you shared that, because that takes us right into the non-traditional approach, right, which is our third theory of resurrection, the non-traditional approach of social and criminal justice. And to give some background, the non-traditional approach comes out of the Black liberation movement. It comes out of the 1970s new prison rights movement, and it was developed by people in by political prisoners, activists, organizers, people in prison, and this analysis is what we carry on today. While at the same time, we discussed in multiple other accounts how the non-traditional approach have been co-opted because of counterinsurgency, right? Because of capitalist racist methods to continue to disenfranchise and take us away from Black liberation, real deep movement organizing. So a lot of people may know of the study of the non-traditional approach, however, don't actively do what Eddie Ellis and Luqmon and Alice Green has done or pushed to do, which is address institutional racism, right? Address that, we as the people who are targeted and impacted by institutional racism deserve to have the power to change our own conditions, our own circumstances. And we will, right? And that we will. And so that's some of the context I wanted to share when we talk about the non-traditional approach. The non-traditional approach to criminal social justice is the first ever published research scholarship to collectively study race, geography, local Black African communities, and the criminal punishment system simultaneously. The non-traditional approach to criminal social justice, aka the NTA, was developed by the intellectual arm of the Black liberation struggles. The NTA was designed to be an African-centered framework, community-specific analysis, and critique to traditional systems, such as the criminal punishment system and other social justice policies and institutions, programs, and other theories, right? Like restorative justice, as Corey was just talking about. Men and women entered prisons, and this is I want to share a quote from the Greenhaven think tank. Men and women entered prisons and spent years there, yet the root cause of their behavior is never confronted because neither the state or the local administration offers any programs or even a visible theory which deals with community-specific problems. Such as a result, we had to design, develop, and implement programs. We ourselves, right, had to design, develop, and implement programs, classes from our Afrocentric, non-traditional approach, which we believe begin to address values and behaviors in many of the attitudes that led to the internal oppression, and our hesitant fear of our own capacity to heal and be in a healing process. The Greenhaven think tank. So the non-traditional approach, right, which is a stance of Afrocentric worldview to handle our own problems because we understand that the state, the administration, the policies will not do so, do not do so, right? And that when we create community-specific approaches, we actually see changes within our own selves, within our own communities, and actually create newer possibilities that are outside of the state. The Greenhaven think tank, the Bedford Hill Sisters, and the Resurrection Study Group all organize a praxis of community-specific programs within and outside the prison system. The NTA teachings, pedagogy, and analysis is not just about dates and facts and citations. This framework helps one know how to think and to think from a non-European perspective and to think from an African-centered worldview, to conceptualize and describe political and historical phenomena as institutional memory, right? Such as chattel slavery, such as the Arab slave trade, such as what happened to our brother Jordan Neely last year being lynched on the train station, right? The NTA framework has saved lives by cultivating an internal spirit, giving people responsibility and a sense of community. The NTA framework gives hope. That's what we're here to do. The KAL is here to give hope. We're a positive virus. We are continuing the legacy of that positive virus to give hope to our communities, to our people, right? And if your program and your institution does not do that, then you are a part of the problem. You are a part of the problem, right? We have and I'll get to more of that later. But the KAL stands on the teachings and legacy of the non-traditional approach to criminal social justice, to continue that through culture, through trainings, through literature, through Pan-African ceremonies, and more focus on collective care, personal and community development, and grassroots community organizing, right? What are you doing this for? That's what we're trying to create programs and trainings to impact the mainstream institutions in our communities, because we ask them, what are you doing this for? What are you doing this for? Is it to heal communities? Is it to develop young people to sustain and have a future, have their own destiny? What are our programs supposed to be doing? And is it doing that? We need to be critical about these things in our communities, and parents, community members, stakeholders, city council members, we need to address this problem. Our analysis is situated within the legacy of the Greenhaven think tank, the Bedford Hill Sisters, the Resurrection Study Group, and the Center for New Leadership as a process of remembering institutional memory, the non-traditional approach of resurrection, right? And we follow and stand on the Black Panther Party, the Young Lords Party, the NAACP from South Carolina, right? Of Robert and Mabel Williams, right?
North Carolina.
North Carolina, right? The North Carolina sector with Robert and Mabel Williams, SNCC, the Lowndes County Freedom organizers, right? Practicing Kwanzaa, right? Which is Afrocentric decolonizing process, right? To re-engage community and to develop each other with each other, for each other. And so there's so many non-traditional approaches that has been passed down. So many non-traditional approaches that we stand on, that we are open and willing to teach the community. And so, that's the non-traditional approach. And yeah, the goal is to, rebuild and sustain community, push for Black liberation movement. And I'm gonna pass to my brother. But I first want to also here's some of the paraphernalia for the non-traditional approach as well. Eddie Ellis, going to the African Black History Museum, I believe in North Carolina. What I Want My Words to Do to You, right? The Bedford Hill Sisters, right? Really deeply organized and talking about harm, systematical harm, interpersonal harm, intrapersonal harm, and how can we get to healing, right? Standing on the legacy of the Stoner Rebellion and taking young people to those places where our ancestors fought back and healed as a process of transformation, as a process of new African development, right? Matula Shakur, right? Bringing acupuncture to our communities to heal ourselves from heroin when the state was getting us stuck on methadone, right? Non-traditional approaches, right? Dr. Alice Green, Luqmon, right? People who were specifically detrimental to African Black people who were coming home out of prison, right? Who were also in prison and needed support. And the People Senate, right? Which is also continuing the legacy of the spirit of Mandela, the legacy of political prisoners and prisoners of war, the legacy to fight against U.S. imperialism. And so with that, I pass to my brother Corey to take us through our last theory.
Ashe, man. Passing that legacy. Shout out to Larry Luqmon White. Just to add on, man, we talked about African sacred science. We talked about the African Mayafa, and Jasiri just broke down the non-traditional approach. We moving on to our fourth framework, no particular order, healing justice, which, you know, is our epistemological framework, which seeks to reclaim our legacy. You know, when we talk about the war and the ways that it has snatched us away from our spirit, when we talk about the NTA, which was developed by political prisoners and prisoners of war and people, prisoners of political consciousness. These are individuals from our neighborhoods, from our families that the state attack and criminalize. And they do that to snatch away our legacy, to snatch away our wisdom, to snatch away our teachings, right? So the healing justice framework is intention to kind of to decriminalize and reclaim our healing practice from African sacred science and from the Black liberation tradition that have been stolen, distorted, discredited, reduced, subjugated, ignored, co-opted by the state, right? It's a remembering process of resurrection. And shout out to the picture on the screen. That's us at the first Curve Fest in New York. Shout out to all of the people, the People's Church, H.O.L.L.A, incredible messengers, our family members, Baba Sekou, Mama Day Kui, Marcellus, see Nemo there. You know, it was a lot of our elders. Baba Daruba was there. Mama Nzinga was there. Sister Ya was there. Brother Shep was there. Baba Tariq was there. We had a lot of our young people in our program was there. You know, our wives and our children and our mothers came out. So shout out to an intergenerational, intersectional space where we bring family healing. Justice is about making healing with our families, making healing everything in our movement, making love, making our culture healing, right? Making our works centered around that. And we're gonna read a quote from our big sisters, our elders, Kara Page and Erica Woodland. They said we want to make a clear distinction between the healing justice framework explored in this anthology. They're talking about the healing justice book, the healing justice lineages, and other works by the same name, rooted in restorative justice, reform, and healing the criminal justice system. The healing justice framework that we speak about is abolitionist and anti-capitalist and do not seek to reform the prison industrial complex. So they just letting you know that they framework of healing justice don't come from the criminal punishment system. It's not about alternatives, right? It's not built by DAs and judges and nonprofits and LOIs and FRPs, right? They're doing a framework of healing work that is coming from a practice of abolishing the system, a practice of abolishing capitalism. And it's rooted in care and care for the people, right? As an analysis of care for the people. And that's really important. We can go to the next slide. We're going to start with another quote. Shout out to the Kindred Southern Healing Justice Collective back in 2000. This movement, this formation is one of the formations that brought us the term healing justice and kind of gave us the concept. You know, even though we've been doing healing traditions, this concept helped us intentionally focus on reclaiming those healing traditions that we've been doing. So in the early 2000s, in the Southeast, so they talking about the South, shout out to Mississippi, shout out to that Mississippian culture, South Carolina. So they connecting the work that they was doing in the South, they was witnessing a rise of anti-Black racism, anti-immigration policies, xenophobia, Islamophobia, criminalization of poverty, and homophobic and transphobic violence. They also witnessed a climb in suicide among Black youth organizers and a mixed burnout among organizers, especially within Black, people of color, indigenous, lesbian, gay, bi, trans, two-spirit, gender non-conforming, and intersex communities in the South, in the Southern movement. So from that, they incited a movement to abolish policies in prisons and the medical industrial complex to build practice, remedies, and actions that will transform the generational trauma that our Southern communities hold in our bones, in our tissues, and in our psyche, right? So this second quote is once again letting them know that that they was in war, that you know that when Black people are being attacked in multiple intersections, from multiple intersections and identity standpoints, right? Whether we undocumented, whether we queer, whether we trans, right? Right, and they criminalizing us, right? And it's centered on our Blackness and our indigenousness, right? And they talked about how our young people, right? We trying to pass on this legacy. We building these programs, we building institutions for our future, for our family, so that our young people, and they seen that, and they built this practice because our young people was burning out, right? So how do we sustain programs that sustain our young people to pass on the struggle of Black liberation and African sovereignty to our young people, right? How do we build programs that pull on the legacy of the South, right? That pull on the legacy of what's the blood in the South on within the land, right? How we planted seeds in the South, right? How we survived through the war in the South, right? And how that South is a reflection of how we survived in other geopolitical spaces as Black African people all around the world, right? And how do we develop healing strategies that attack the medical industrial complex, that attack back these institutions, right? It's not just about healing ourselves, right? How do we build institutions that attack back these institutions that are so-called acting like they healing us when they attacking us? I think that's very important within this framework as well. And it reminds us that, you know, our work comes from previous generations, that we building on the mound of Black liberation, and we honoring the lineages of our tradition, right? And that's political, right? And that's spiritual, right? And our program should be able to have elders and ancestors, and that we stand on, right? And not outcomes that come from FRPs and LOIs, right? But come from the mandates of looking at the records of our legacy, listening to the unfinished works of our legacy, and seeing where we got to heal and where we got to fight at. With that being said, I want to just shout out, you know, H.O.L.L.A, who's been doing a lot of healing justice movement work, Harriet Tubman, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, Audre Lorde, Assata Shakur, the Black Liberation Survival Programs, right? The Healing Justice Lineages, Papa Pete and Mama C in Africa, Mama Bibi, Mama Esperanza Martel, Been doing a lot of healing work, going all the way back since the 60s and continue doing work. Shout out to Harlem Peace Walk, Sankofa, the Black Power movement that developed in Greenwood, Mississippi, the Black Maroons, building communities in nature all across the Americas. That's deep healing work, not relying on the state, not relying on the LOI, building systems of care, systems of sustainability. So shout out to our legacy. And it's important for us to use that genetic memory to continue developing institutions like the KAL-INSTITUTE and supporting institutions like the KAL-INSTITUTE and moving away from institutions that don't stand on the legacy of our people. Ashe. Shout out to Mama Delcia Pagan, Puerto Rico, and all of our elders and ancestors and our altars. Shout out to the altars and the libations. That's our healing justice. I pass on that, man. I think we wrapping up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you all to our, community, those who was able to tap in. Please share the video. This was all to share about our theories of resurrection, our genetic memory, your genetic memory, right? So we hope this relates back to you, that this opens up a portal for you wanting to learn more about who you are and how do we actually create programs to transform our communities and ourselves for Black liberation. And so please follow the Kabaka Alice Luqmon Institute at kal-institute.org. Sign up to be a member so you could get more information on the trainings that we're holding, right? For mainstream institutions, it's paid for, paid trainings, right? That you have to pay for, as well as our engagements that we will have, our Pan-African ceremonies like we got coming up, Kwanzaa. So please get involved, and then also reach out if for any young people who want to get and participate in the upcoming 24-month process that we are launching in 2026. Thank you. Also want to thank our brother Isaac Quarterly.
Thank you.
Been supporting us so consciously and selflessly, and so thank you, brother. And Shemin-Hotep community, Shemin-Hotep.
Free the land, free the land. Free all our political prisoners.
All power to the people.
All power to the people, man. Keep healing, resurrect.
We was born into a system designed to keep us behind. But knowledge is power, keep that in mind. Pay attention to the road and the signs. You gon' shine, you gon' know when it's time. We was born into oppression, threw us in them jails, waist deep in depression. Art of deception, knowledge is a weapon. They even took that away, it costs for a lesson. School prices go up, kids don't show up. Gang signs get thrown up, progression getting slowed up. Politicians speak on it, they acting like they know us. They just wanna control us with the lies that they told us. And I don't stand for it. Every other day, got a body on the camcorder, and we don't get no damn order. And Flint ain't get no damn water. On the gram, watch another black man slaughtered. Either that or the can, they had a plan for it. They stopped slavery and opened prisons, and we all know religion causes division. You gotta see the vision and make a decision. Grew up in the streets, so the mission, they know that I'm with it. I feel like Nat Turner on the back burner, waiting for my time to rise. Started on the crack corner. We ain't have nothing but a pack on us. Police spin the block, they was trying to snap on us. Mama rent through, he try and get that stack for. But D's caught him round the corner with that crack on him.
Through the hell and rain, heard him say it won't be the same. Reason why we praise, cause we know we'll find better days. Soaring the heaven gates, and we won't be late. Soaring the heaven gates, and we won't be late.
Hey yo, I'm numb to the pain, scarred by the game, reminiscing on them days like a slave locked in a